Welcome back to Off the Beaten Couch. I'm Bonnie Adams, and this is episode 2 in the Truth About Addiction and Abuse series. I'm glad you're here. Today in episode 2, we're getting into the heart of the matter. How exactly coercive control shows up in relationships where one partner, or maybe both, use substances. It's one of the most confusing and damaging parts of abusive relationships, especially when addiction is part of the mix. Now, in episode 1, we dismantled the myth that substance use causes abuse with some really heady information, so thank you for sticking with me. Today, we're going to build on that by naming the tactics. These are behaviors that people use to control, dominate, manipulate, and punish, all under the shadow of substance use. In this episode, we're going to look at the manipulation of care, how coercive control hides behind their helping. We're going to unpack how help can become control, and how your body often recognizes manipulation before your brain does. Now, a lot of the times when you're in the middle of it, it's really difficult to recognize, and sometimes others see it before we do. Then they might try to warn us or bring up concerns, and because we really love our person, we completely dismiss them, and we might even stop talking to them thinking that they're trying to come between us and our person. And that might even be something that our person tries to convince us of. They will completely capitalize on the confusion they cause and the distrust that they instill. Let's look again at what coercive control really means and how it shows up when substances are involved. It's the kind of abuse that doesn't always look like abuse. In fact, it can look a lot like care and concern and love. Now, as always, a quick reminder, this content can be very intense. If anything feels too heavy, pause, breathe, and document what you're feeling, and reach out for support. So before I dive into tactics, let's really ground ourselves with a shared language. Coercive control is not about one blow or outburst. It's a pattern, a system of sorts of domination. And in a substance-using relationship, those tactics may be colored by addiction dynamics, but their core is exactly the same. They're trying to mold, restrict, or reshape your life to serve their control. So when I say tactics, I mean specific behavioral strategies, not just emotional abuse or physical assault, that are part of that control system, but not all of it. In fact, not all abusers actually use physical violence to control their targets. The threat of physical violence alone is enough when someone is coercive and controlling. The possibility they could escalate keeps us in that fear. And today, I want to walk through several of the most common ones that I see, especially when substances are in the mix. These tactics are isolation and restriction, surveillance and monitoring, financial control, withholding resources, gaslighting, emotional manipulation, threats and ultimatums, forced use, and withholding substances. Now, imagine a partner who says, "I just worry about you when you go out with your friends." Or, "I don't like the way they talk to you. I don't think it's good for your recovery." Or, "I don't think it's good for my recovery." Now, at first it sounds really protective, and maybe sometimes it is. But if that concern slowly turns into surveillance, like checking your messages, guilt tripping you for wanting space, or using your mental health or sobriety as leverage, that's not care, that's control. This is called coercive control. It is the pattern of domination that traps someone not through violence, but through 1,000 tiny restrictions dressed up as love or safety or help. It is the ongoing exertion of power through intimidation, surveillance, micromanagement, isolation, threats, and the slow erosion of your autonomy. It doesn't always look like violence. It often looks like small rules, demands, expectations that come with punishments, and even them throwing fits and chipping away your freedoms piece by piece. When addiction is involved, this gets even trickier because the abusive partner might say, "I'm just trying to keep myself sober," or "You can't handle stress, so I'm going to do this for you." And to everybody in the outside world, and maybe even to you, it sounds reasonable, but what's really happening beneath that is an erasing of your autonomy, your choice, and your voice. In many abusive relationships without substances, isolation is core. You can't see them, you can't talk to them, you're too dependent on me. In substance-using relationships, this can take twisted forms. They might demand that you quit going to acquaintances who don't approve of them using. And they might insist that they drive you everywhere, which really makes you dependent on their schedule when you used to have autonomy. They might monitor your phone, your texts, your social media, and claim that they're suspicious of infidelity or substance use or secretly calling somebody else. They could even convince you that the people closest to you don't really like you and are just tolerating you. They use absolutes like, no one likes you. They all just tolerate you. Or, it's really sad how your family treats you like that. I'm glad you have me, so you know what love really looks like. If they claim your friends judge them or that you enabled their using, they can convince others you're toxic. It's easier to isolate you under the logic of addiction boundaries. Now, surveillance can escalate during this time, like hidden tracking apps, reading your messages, insisting on knowing all your passwords, and telling you it's for your own safety. But notice how control is always justified as care. They map your movements and limit your freedom. Control of finances is a massive lever in abusive systems, and substances often exacerbate it. This can look like withholding access to money or bank accounts or credit cards, and controlling how you spend funds. Like, you have to ask for gas money and then they demand receipts for justification. They demand that you pay for their substances or bail them out. They might use the threat that if you don't give them receipts or do what they want, they'll just take you off all the accounts or stop giving you money. They accumulate debt in your name or manipulate shared finances so that leaving or surviving feels impossible without them. In relationships with addiction, financial drain is often explained away. Like, they had to pay for their rehab or buying alcohol. But those justifications become weapons and end up turning you into a financial caretaker or even creating codependency. After a while, you're walking a tightrope, asking permission to spend money. You can't even buy a pack of gum because you're terrified of how they're going to react. And eventually you feel paralyzed to leave because you can't imagine surviving financially. Their patterns of depletion and debt are so sneaky that by the time you recognize what happens, you're stuck. One of the more insidious tactics, and one that just infuriates me, is gaslighting. And this is when someone manipulates you into doubting your memory, perception, or sanity. And sometimes abusers will flip this phrase on you in a tactic called Darvo. We'll talk about that tactic in another episode. So in a substance-using relationship, this can blend with blame around use. The heart of gaslighting is that they want you disoriented, less certain, and more dependent on them. They might tell you how stressed they are when they're sober and that you're overreacting to their abuse, or shaming you for being upset when they continue their use, as if you shouldn't be upset when they continue to use or when they hurt you. They tell you you're imagining things, or that conversations never happened, or they never said something you definitely remember them saying, or even blaming you for their anger and telling you that it was because of the tone you used when you said something or you copped an attitude with them. Accountability is very low. Because substance use gives a perpetrator a plausible excuse, these lies become harder to challenge. And you might think, am I misremembering? Was I too emotional? Did I push him too far? This kind of psychological abuse is often invisible to outsiders, but internally it's devastating to you. You start doubting yourself. You start walking on eggshells, and you start minimizing your own feelings. These tactics are so good. They literally train you how to gaslight yourself, and you start questioning your own sanity and eventually your own identity. Gaslighting also shows up in cloudiness. Like, they shift expectations suddenly and develop selective memory and then deny everything. They might say things like, I didn't say I'd drive you home one day, then claim that they've always been there for you and would never say anything like that the next. You can't anchor stability when memory is disputed. Combined with substance use, the abuser can claim alcohol or drugs affected their memory, that you know they don't think straight when they're drunk or high, and you know better than to start something when they're drunk or high. That claim is so convenient, but it layers damage by making you question your own mind. And let me tell you right now, you didn't imagine it. You're not crazy. Now let's talk about threats and ultimatums. These are really powerful tools in coercive control and part of ongoing shaping. Now, if you use substances or drink with them, they might threaten they'll use it against you in court if you try to leave, or that if you don't do what they want, they'll relapse and it'll be all your fault. Threatening you that if you don't answer their calls or texts, they'll drive drunk and whatever happens will be on you, or that they'll even tell your family all the things you've done in the relationship with them. Maybe this sounds really silly when I'm saying it out loud, but when you're in the middle of it and you're at the receiving end of this type of control, it feels very real because they've done something along the way that has convinced you that they're really going to act upon their threats. They make these threats that they'll post your dirty laundry online. They'll take the kids or ruin your career. And the kicker here is that you know they can and you know they will. Then there are the coercive promises. If you do what I want, I'll stay sober. It's a lot easier to be nice to you when you support me. Or if you do this one little thing for me, I'll stay sober and I'll stop getting so angry with you. The next time they do, though, you go back to those promises and you try to break down the part where you screwed up because they've now convinced you this is all your fault. They bind you with hope, fear, and leverage, and they build dependence and guilt. They'll teach you that obedience is the key to your safety and the cost of defying them is way too pricey. These threats and promises eventually become part of your own internal logic. If I break their rules, they'll punish me. If I follow the rules, maybe peace will return, but it's all a trap and they're building up their ammunition for next time. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. Now, a tactic relatively unique or more pronounced when substances are involved is forced substance use or creating reliance on them by them withholding the substance. Because substances create a false sense of connection, these folks will try to pressure, coerce, or even demand that you use with them and convince you it's because they don't want to use alone or tell you it's safer because you're with them. All fallacies, all lies. Maybe you've even already considered it because then they'd want to spend time with you if you were using with them, or you're afraid if you don't use a little with them, they'll go back to using a lot. Then they eventually withhold, so you experience withdrawal or cravings. This is power being exerted through addiction, not because your dependency becomes a tool in the control architecture. It's painful, insidious, and deeply unfair, and I am so sorry if you are going through this. Importantly, this is different from co-use out of shared behavior or relapse triggers. This is intentional control, and it's probably one of the more insidious forms of control that I've seen in these dynamics when working with individuals and couples in recovery. You're not a collaborator in this game, you're being manipulated. And the worst part about it is you probably know. And there's nothing you can do. Remember that these tactics are still tactics. Control is the target, and substances are the route and not the cause. Also, because substance use can produce chaos, unpredictability, shame, secrecy, it gives cover for more manipulative maneuvering. So the abuser can claim, I didn't remember, or it was during withdrawal, and make denial more believable. This is why naming the tactics in these contexts is critical. Survivors often internalize that it was the substance, but when you see the pattern, you can start to reclaim clarity and power. One thing that I've noticed is that people don't usually recognize when they're being controlled. We've got this really distorted view that abuse is only physical, and so if they don't hit me, it's not abuse. Some of the things I've noticed in people experiencing coercive control is that they're left really confused by interactions with this person. You experience a lot of guilt because you should feel grateful for all this person does for you. You become very dependent on this person, like you need them to feel safe or stable. Shame is a big sign too, because you used to be independent and assertive, and now you can't even go where you want, when you want. You feel trapped, and you can't explain why because they've never hit you. But you have this gnawing feeling that if you try to end things, it won't go well for you. You've stopped seeing your family and friends because it's just too stressful and will likely start a fight. You minimize what's happening and you tell others that your person just cares a lot. You stop bringing up concerns and start to just stuff everything deep down to avoid the conflict. You're constantly over-explaining and apologizing, and you even change all of your routines just to keep the peace. If you recognize yourself in any of those, it means that your system is adapting for survival, okay? It is not weakness. Your body knows that this person and this situation is extremely unsafe for you, and so it is going into a fawning mode to be able to preserve your safety. So what do you do now if you recognize some or even all of these tactics in your own relationship? First, try to stop blaming the substance. Abuse is abuse. Start to safety plan. Map which tactics are active in your relationship and identify which tactics they use when they're not using versus when they are using. Notice if it escalates one way or another. Pre-plan your responses and have neutral phrases ready. They usually have their go-to phrases, you probably know by now, so plan your responses around those. Try to create a safe exit plan around windows of use, like during binges or relapses. Only use boundaries when it is safe to do so. Sometimes you really have to walk on eggshells in these relationships, so if you choose to use a boundary, keep it firm and use a statement like, if you're going to drink, then I'm going to stay somewhere else. When it's time to seek external legal help or support, make sure you look for clinicians who are trained in both domestic violence and addiction, not just generic couples therapy. The reason why is because not all couples therapists are trained or versed in these tactics and recognizing coercive control or abuse. They'll likely pin it under the context of addiction, like it only occurs when this person uses, and that's just not the truth. And so your concerns and your hopes that this therapist is going to notice that your person is manipulating or he's abusive, they're not going to be able to pick up on that. So you want somebody who is specifically trained in domestic violence and addiction. You want to look for domestic violence agencies that understand the intersection of substance abuse and coercive control. Now, you can look into legal advocacy and restraining orders that take into account non-physical control in jurisdictions where that is recognized. You can check with your state laws to see if coercive control is listed underneath their domestic violence statutes. Get your safety networks, trusted friends, a hotline, emergency exit route, a journal you can keep in a safe place, talk with trusted support, therapy again. Try to reclaim small bits of your agency where you can, like decisions about your body, time, and relationships. Hold on to what you can control. Control tactics don't stop just because we name them, but recognizing them begins a shift and can hopefully start moving you in a direction where safety, security, and peace exist. If you're working with a therapist or support group, take those tactics there. Ask which of these show up in my life, which feel the heaviest, which one feels like the thread I could pull first. And if you ever feel unsafe, retreating to a site of self-preservation is not defeat. Again, it's wisdom. Use your safety plan, your network, and your voice as much as you can. Now in episode 3, we're going to go deeper into a specific painful intersection, addiction when substance use itself becomes the weapon. We're going to look at scenarios like coerced use, relapse threats, and manipulation through addiction. If today's episode resonated, please like and share safely and subscribe. And if you feel safe, leave a comment or reach out. Again, this is for education and awareness, not a substitute for legal or medical advice. If you're in danger, please contact emergency services or a trusted support agency. Take care of yourself. You deserve safety, dignity, and clarity. I'll see you in episode 3.